In the icy grip of the North Sea, two great navies collided in a brutal game of cat and mouse. One side armed with secret intelligence, the other racing for survival. Shots thundered, ships burned, and one fatal misstep changed everything. This is the Battle of Dogger Bank. Welcome to ASMR War History, where we quietly dive into the loudest moments of our past. If you enjoy these deep dives into history's most intense battles, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. It really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let's look to the foggy waters of 1915, where secrets, strategy, and steel clashed in one of World War I's most dramatic naval encounters, the Battle of Dogger Bank. Let's start off with an overview of the events. On January 24th, 1915, the cold waters of the North Sea became the stage for one of World War I's pivotal naval clashes, the Battle of Dogger Bank. It was a confrontation between the might of the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet. But this wasn't just a chance encounter. The British had an edge: intelligence. Through intercepted and decoded German wireless transmissions, they learned of a German raiding squadron heading straight for Dogger Bank. Seizing the opportunity, ships of the Grand Fleet set out to intercept. The German squadron, smaller and slower, was caught off guard. Realizing the danger, they turned for home, but the British were in pursuit. What followed was a high-stakes chase across the North Sea, with British ships pushing hard to close the distance. Long-range gunfire echoed across the waves as the British bore down. In the chaos, the German armoured cruiser Blücher, lagging at the rear, became the prime target. Under relentless shellfire, she was disabled, turning into a sitting duck. Yet, in a twist of fate, the British flagship HMS Lion wasn't spared either. German shells found their mark, leaving Lion crippled and out of action. Then came a moment of critical miscommunication. British signalling faltered. The pursuing ships, misreading orders, broke off their chase of the fleeing Germans to focus on sinking the already doomed Blücher. While Blücher met her end beneath the waves, the rest of the German squadron slipped away, vanishing into the mist and smoke. The Germans returned to harbour, battered and bruised. Several ships required extensive repairs, but they had survived. HMS Lion managed to limp back to port, but would be sidelined for months. For the British, the cost was light. No ships lost and minimal casualties. The Germans, however, had paid dearly, losing Blücher and most of her crew. The Battle of Dogger Bank was declared a British victory, but it was a victory that came with hard lessons. Both navies took a hard look at their tactics and leadership. Officers who faltered were replaced, and procedures were overhauled. The battle was a reminder that in war, even with the upper hand, missteps could turn the tide. Dogger Bank was more than just a clash of steel. It was a glimpse into the evolving nature of naval warfare in the modern age, where intelligence, speed, and precision could decide the fate of fleets. Now, let's rewind a bit. Before the outbreak of World War I, the arteries of global communication lay beneath the oceans, undersea cables stretching along vital shipping lanes. Most of these cables were under British control, so when Britain issued its ultimatum to Germany in August 1914, they didn't just declare war, they severed Germany's voice to the outside world. In a calculated move, British forces cut Germany's undersea cables, leaving the Kaiser's navy reliant on wireless transmissions. It was a shift that exposed German communications to prying ears, despite the heavy use of complex ciphers to mask their messages. But the British needed more than just static. They needed the keys to the codes. The first stroke of luck came on August 26, 1914, when the German light cruiser SMS Magdeburg ran aground in the Baltic Sea. Russian forces quickly boarded the stranded vessel and recovered a critical asset, the Signalbuch der Kaiserlichen Marine, or SKM, Germany's primary naval codebook. The Russians shared their prize with their British allies, handing Room 40 its first major breakthrough. But fortune wasn't finished smiling. Just weeks earlier, on August 11th, Australian authorities had intercepted the German-Australian steamer Hobart near Melbourne. On board, they found the Handelsverkehrsbuch, or HVSB, the codebook used by the German Navy to communicate with merchant vessels and coordinate within the High Seas Fleet. This precious document was rushed to Britain, arriving by the end of October. Then on October 17th, during the Battle off Texel, the German destroyer SMS 119 met its end. As the ship sank beneath the waves, the crew made a desperate attempt to prevent their secrets from falling into enemy hands, casting a lead-lined chest of classified documents into the sea. But fate had other plans. On November 30th, a British trawler dragged the chest from the deep. Inside was the Verkehrsbuch, or VB codebook, used exclusively by flag officers of the German Navy. With these codebooks in their hands, the British Admiralty created a code-breaking powerhouse, Room 40. Rear Admiral Henry Oliver, head of the Intelligence Division of the Admiralty War Staff, assembled a team of academics, linguists, mathematicians, and classicists to turn intercepted German transmissions into actionable intelligence. But there was a problem. These brilliant minds had little naval experience, leading to misinterpretations and costly mistakes. In the early days, Room 40's findings were treated with caution, especially by the Admiralty's Operations Division, who doubted the reliability of intelligence from scholars with no sea legs. Realising this gap, Oliver brought in Commander HWW Hope, an experienced naval officer who bridged the divide between the civilian cryptographers and the demands of naval warfare. His presence helped solidify Room 40's credibility, but internal politics still hampered its full potential. Oliver ran Room 40 like a personal fiefdom. Even after his promotion to Chief of the Admiralty War Staff, he kept tight control over what intelligence left the room. Important decrypts were often filtered, delayed, or withheld entirely. Critical information flowed directly to Winston Churchill's inner circle at the Admiralty, but often bypassed those who needed it most, commanders at sea. German naval protocol played into British hands. Every night, German ships were required to report their positions via wireless. British listening stations, dotted along the east coast, used cross-bearings to triangulate these transmissions. This signals intelligence gave the Royal Navy a distinct edge. They no longer needed to waste time and fuel on constant patrols or wide, aimless sweeps of the North Sea. Instead, they could target German movements with precision, conserving resources while maintaining strategic dominance. Through Room 40, the Admiralty pieced together Germany's naval order of battle, tracking ship deployments and anticipating enemy raids. This intelligence should have given Britain an overwhelming advantage, but bureaucracy got in the way. The Admiralty's lack of an effective war staff and the poor communication between Room 40, Oliver, and the operations staff meant that valuable intelligence often arrived late, was incomplete, or was misunderstood. Even Admiral Jellicoe, commander of the Grand Fleet, recognised the flaw. He requested a mobile decryption team to accompany his ships at sea, only to be denied on security grounds. It wasn't until 1917, after missed opportunities and preventable setbacks, that the Admiralty overhauled its approach. By then, Room 40 had matured into a vital cog in Britain's naval war machine. But the early years were marked by a critical lesson. Even the most groundbreaking intelligence is powerless if it can't reach the people who need it in time. In the early months of World War I, the mighty German high seas fleet found itself largely bottled up in port after the British victory at the Battle of Heligoland Bight in 1914. But Admiral Friedrich von Ingenohl, the commander-in-chief of the German fleet, wasn't content to sit idle. He devised a bold plan, a raid on the English east coast, targeting the towns of Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. At the heart of this operation was the 1st Scouting Group, led by Admiral Franz von Hipper. His force was formidable. 3 powerful battlecruisers, a large armoured cruiser, supported by a screen of light cruisers and swift destroyers. The goal was simple: strike at Britain's coastline, create panic, and lure out elements of the Royal Navy. On the morning of December 16th, 1914, as the winter sea churned under overcast skies, Hipper's squadron opened fire at precisely 8 o'clock. Shells rained down on the unsuspecting towns. In Hartlepool, the industrial port bore the brunt of the attack. The coastal defences fired back, but against the sheer firepower of German battlecruisers, their resistance was fleeting. In Scarborough and Whitby, there were no defences. Civilians ran for cover as shells smashed into homes, churches, and public buildings. By the time the guns fell silent, 108 civilians lay dead, and 525 more were wounded. The news spread like wildfire across Britain, igniting outrage and fear. This was the first successful foreign attack on British soil since the 17th century. The public was stunned that German warships had sailed so close, shelled peaceful towns, and vanished into the mist, unchallenged. But it wasn't for lack of trying. The Royal Navy had in fact sailed out to intercept the raiders. But stormy seas, thick fog, and, critically, failures in communication allowed Hipper's squadron to slip through the cracks. Despite British efforts, the Germans vanished back into the North Sea without a scratch. The raid was a propaganda victory for Germany, but within the walls of the German Admiralty, blame was quick to follow. Admiral Ingenohl, the architect of the operation, was criticised for not seizing what many believed was a missed opportunity to trap and cripple British naval forces. In truth, Ingenohl had taken a daring risk, striking deep into enemy waters, and his plan had worked. Yet instead of praise, he faced scorn. For Britain, the raid was a wake-up call. It wasn't just about the loss of life or the damage to coastal towns. It was a blow to national pride. The British public demanded answers. How could the mighty Royal Navy have failed to protect its own shores? But for the Germans, the raid had achieved its psychological impact. Fear had been sown. Britain was vulnerable. And the North Sea, once considered a shield, was now a doorway through which war could reach British soil. The British response to the German raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool, and Whitby left the public furious and the Admiralty embarrassed. To many, it seemed as though the Royal Navy had been caught completely off guard, allowing German warships to approach the English coast, bombard towns, and then slip away unscathed. In truth, the British had known about the raid in advance, thanks to intercepted and decoded wireless messages from the brilliant codebreakers in Room 40. They had been forewarned. But despite this crucial intelligence, the British still failed to stop the German squadron. In 1921, the official naval historian Julian Corbett wrote a damning assessment. 2 of the most efficient and powerful British squadrons, knowing approximately what to expect, had failed to bring to action an enemy who was acting in close conformity with our appreciation and with whose advanced screen contact had been established. The reality was that the British had narrowly avoided a much greater disaster. The 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, commanded by Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty, had gone out to intercept the raiders but was left exposed unsupported by the 2nd Battle Squadron under Vice Admiral Sir George Warrender. When contact was finally made, the British ships failed to bring the German raiding force into full battle. At the heart of this failure was a breakdown in communication. The code breakers of Room 40 had done their job, providing key intelligence about German movements. But as messages travelled through layers of command, delays crept in. Some intercepts, decoded during the action, took as long as 2 hours to reach British commanders at sea, by which time the information was outdated or misleading. In one critical instance, news of the German high seas fleet's movements reached British commanders so late that they believed the Germans were still approaching when, in fact, they were already on their way home. Confusion reigned at sea. Beatty's signals to his squadron were ambiguous, and some British commanders hesitated, waiting for clear instructions instead of using their initiative. This hesitation allowed the German ships to escape. The British Admiralty took the failure seriously. On December 30th, Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, commander of the Grand Fleet, issued new orders. From then on, officers were instructed that when in direct contact with German ships, they should treat orders from commanders unaware of local conditions as guidelines, not strict commands. This gave officers more freedom to act on the spot, but even with this shift, Jellicoe and Beatty rejected some Admiralty recommendations, especially the idea of loosening ship formations to allow more flexible tactics. They feared that doing so would decentralize command too much and risk chaos in the heat of battle. The failed counteraction revealed cracks in Britain's naval strategy. Intelligence was only as good as its delivery, and rigid command structures could stifle initiative at the critical moment. The raid had humiliated Britain, but it also served as a harsh lesson, one that the Royal Navy would not forget. Admiral Franz von Hipper was convinced that British forces had been receiving advance warnings of German naval movements. He suspected that British and Dutch fishing boats, blending in with local fleets near the German Bight and Dogger Bank, were acting as covert observation posts. Positioned midway between Germany and the English coast, the Dogger Bank was a strategic choke point. A single signal from a fishing trawler could alert the British in time for their battlecruisers to intercept German ships, especially on their return journey. To counter this, Hipper ordered German ships to rigorously enforce search and seizure rules. Fishing boats suspected of spying were hauled into Cuxhaven for thorough inspections. But Hipper wasn't content with simply tightening patrols. Buoyed by the success of previous coastal raids, he began planning a more aggressive operation, one that would clear the Dogger Bank of British fishing vessels and any neutral ships acting as informants. More than that, he aimed to target any small British warships patrolling the area. By early 1915, the German fleet had grown significantly. 4 new König-class dreadnoughts, SMS König, Grosser Kurfürst, Markgraf, and Kronprinz, had bolstered the 3rd Battle Squadron, along with the formidable Derfflinger-class battlecruiser, Derfflinger. This reinforced the striking power of the German high seas fleet. Yet, Kaiser Wilhelm II remained cautious. Since the start of the war, he had strictly limited the use of the high seas fleet, prohibiting large-scale operations that could risk its destruction. On January 10th, he reiterated this ban, but allowed for limited strategic sorties, designed to isolate and destroy small British units or catch segments of the Grand Fleet under favourable conditions. With this in mind, Hipper's operation was carefully crafted. The plan was simple: clear the Dogger Bank, destroy any British light forces encountered, and then retreat under the protection of the main fleet. But recent British activity near the German Bight had not gone unnoticed. On January 19th, Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty had conducted a reconnaissance of the area. A German aircraft spotted his movements, raising alarms within the German command. Fearing an imminent British threat, Admiral Friedrich von Ingenohl ordered Hipper to act swiftly. On January 24th, Hipper sailed with the 1st Scouting Group, a powerful formation of battlecruisers. Seydlitz as his flagship, Moltke, Derfflinger, and the armoured cruiser Blücher. Supporting them were 4 light cruisers and 18 destroyers. Hipper's goal was to surprise and eliminate any British forces in the area. But unknown to Hipper, the British were already one step ahead, thanks to the silent work of their code breakers in Room 40. The stage was set for a clash that would test the speed, firepower, and strategy of both navies at Dogger Bank. On January 23, 1915, the British Admiralty received a critical breakthrough. Wireless transmissions from German ships in the Jade Bight had been intercepted and decoded by the cryptanalysts of Room 40. The message was clear. Admiral Franz von Hipper was leading a German sortie toward the Dogger Bank. The clock was ticking. At the Admiralty in London, Admiral Sir John Fisher, First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, and Rear Admiral Henry Oliver wasted no time. They devised a plan to confront the Germans with overwhelming force. A rendezvous was set for 7 a.m. on January 24th, 30 nautical miles north of the Dogger Bank, roughly 210 miles west of Heligoland. The British intended to catch the German squadron before it could retreat. The spearhead of the British response was the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron under Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty. His flagship, HMS Lion, was joined by HMS Tiger and HMS Princess Royal, 3 of the most powerful battlecruisers afloat. Supporting them was the newly formed 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron, led by Rear Admiral Gordon Moore. His flagship, HMS New Zealand, along with HMS Indomitable, added to the British firepower. But the plan didn't end there. From Harwich, Commodore Reginald Tyrwhitt sailed with Harwich Force, 3 light cruisers and 35 destroyers. Their mission was to sweep the Dogger Bank and rendezvous with Beatty's battlecruisers at dawn on January 24th. The idea was simple: block the German escape and close the trap. To ensure complete coverage, the British cast an even wider net. The 3rd Cruiser Squadron, along with the 7 pre-dreadnoughts of the 3rd Battle Squadron under Admiral Edward Eden Bradford, sailed from Rosyth. They moved into a position in the North Sea, where they could cut off the Germans if they attempted to flee northward. And finally, the might of the Grand Fleet was set in motion. Leaving Scapa Flow at 9 p.m. on January 23rd, the fleet began a sweeping manoeuvre across the southern North Sea. Though they wouldn't reach the Dogger Bank until the afternoon of the next day, their presence would loom over the battle. As the German force moved closer to its target, the British counterforce was already closing in. At 7:05 a.m. on January 24th, under clear skies and with excellent visibility, the British 1st Light Cruiser Squadron, led by Commodore William Goodenough, spotted German screening vessels near the Dogger Bank. On the morning of January 24th, 1915, the North Sea became the stage for a dramatic naval clash, the Battle of Dogger Bank. As dawn broke, smoke from approaching ships was spotted on the horizon. Admiral Franz von Hipper, leading the German force, quickly realised he had been caught off guard. At 7:35 a.m, he ordered his fleet to turn southeast, aiming to escape the British trap. But there was a problem. The German squadron was slowed by the armoured cruiser Blücher and a group of coal-fuelled torpedo boats. The British battlecruisers were faster and gaining ground. By 8 a.m, lookouts aboard the British flagship HMS Lion had the German battlecruisers in sight. But there was another issue. The older British ships in the 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron lagged behind, leaving the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron to press the chase. Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty took a calculated risk. He angled his approach so that the wind would clear the British smoke away, while blowing the German smoke into their own line of sight, obscuring their gunners' vision. At 8:52 a.m, Lion opened fire from a staggering 20,000 yards, about 11 miles. One by one, the British ships joined the fight as they came within range. The Germans couldn't return fire until 9:11 a.m, their guns lacking the same range. No warships had ever fought at such long distances or at such high speeds before. Accuracy was a challenge for both sides. The British focused their fire on Seydlitz at the front of the German line and Blucher at the rear. Beatty intended for his two trailing battlecruisers, New Zealand and Indomitable, to target Blucher, while his three leading ships took on the German vanguard. But there was confusion. HMS Tiger, under Captain Henry Pelly, mistakenly doubled up fire on Seydlitz, leaving Moltke untouched. Pelly misread the splash patterns from Lion's shells, believing them to be his own. The mistake proved costly. At 9:43 a.m, Seydlitz was struck by a 13.5-inch shell from Lion. The hit penetrated the aft turret barbette, triggering a devastating fire. Flames raced through the working chambers, igniting propellant charges all the way to the magazines. Both rear turrets were destroyed, and 165 men were killed. Only the quick thinking of Executive Officer Wilhelm Heidkamp, who ordered the magazines flooded, saved Seydlitz from total destruction. But the British weren't unscathed for long. At 10:18 a.m, the German battlecruiser Derfflinger landed several 12-inch shells on Lion, damaging her engines and causing severe flooding. The mighty flagship slowed and began to fall behind. At 10:41 a.m, disaster nearly struck again. Lion took another shell hit on her forward turret. Flames briefly flared, threatening a magazine explosion, but the crew managed to extinguish the fire just in time. By 10:30 a.m, Blucher, the slowest ship in Hipper's fleet, became the main target. A shell from Princess Royal ignited fires and crippled her boiler room, forcing her to reduce speed to 17 knots. She lagged behind, a sitting duck. Beatty ordered Indomitable, his slowest ship, to break off and finish off Blucher. Meanwhile, with ammunition running low, Hipper faced a hard decision. At 10:54 a.m, he ordered his remaining ships to break for home, leaving Blucher to her fate. It seemed that the British were on the verge of annihilating the entire German squadron, until disaster struck their command chain. From the bridge of the Wounded Lion, Beatty spotted what he believed was a submarine periscope at 10:54 a.m, right in their path. He immediately ordered a 90-degree turn to port to avoid the perceived threat. The periscope may have actually been the wake of a torpedo launched 15 minutes earlier by the German destroyer V5, now surfacing. At 11:02 a.m, realizing that the sharp turn would allow the Germans to escape, Beatty tried to course correct. He ordered course northeast to limit the turn and followed with engage the enemy's rear, signalling his ships to continue the chase. But there was a problem. With Lion's electrical systems crippled, the crew had to use flag signals, and both orders were hoisted at the same time. Rear Admiral Gordon Moore, commanding from New Zealand, misread the signals. Instead of chasing the fleeing German fleet, he interpreted the orders as a command to focus entirely on Blucher. The entire British squadron turned its attention to the doomed cruiser. Blucher put up a fierce fight. She managed to cripple the British destroyer HMS Meteor and scored 2 hits on the British battlecruisers with her 8.3-inch guns. But she was outnumbered and outgunned. Around 70 shells tore into Blucher, devastating the ship. 2 torpedoes from the light cruiser Arethusa finally finished the job. At 1:13 p.m, Blucher capsized and sank at the coordinates 54 degrees 25 minutes north, 5 degrees 25 minutes east. 792 men went down with the ship. British destroyers rushed to rescue survivors, but the operation was cut short when the German Zeppelin L5 and a seaplane arrived, dropping small bombs on the rescue effort. Though no British ships were hit, the threat forced the rescuers to withdraw, leaving many survivors in the water. Meanwhile, the main German fleet was already out of reach. Lion, crippled and listing, began the long, slow journey home, making only 10 knots. Vice Admiral Beatty considered sending the rest of his fleet after the German ships, but Lion's condition worsened. Seawater contaminated her boilers, reducing her speed to a mere 8 knots. Eventually, Indomitable had to take her under tow, a dangerous operation in waters prowled by German submarines. For 2 tense hours, Indomitable towed the wounded flagship, the fleet crawling along at 10 knots. By 5 p.m, the Grand Fleet arrived, bolstering the escort with 13 light cruisers and 67 destroyers. But the threat wasn't over. The Admiralty warned of a possible German nighttime destroyer attack. However, the German ships were too far away, and their destroyers were low on fuel. The attack never came. The Battle of Dogger Bank was over. 1 German cruiser lost, a British battlecruiser crippled, and a near miss at total disaster. The North Sea had been the stage for a fierce clash, but it wouldn't be the last. By the morning of January 25th, 1915, the wounded HMS Lion and her escort, Indomitable, were still struggling through the North Sea. Overnight, Lion's engine troubles worsened, forcing the ships to slow to just 7 knots, barely over 8 miles per hour. At dawn, they were still 100 nautical miles, about 120 miles, from the safety of the Firth of Forth. The British destroyers reformed into an anti-submarine screen, guarding the vulnerable battlecruiser as they crept closer to home waters. It was a long and nerve-wracking journey. Any lurking German submarine could have finished Lion with a single torpedo. Finally, at midnight, the battered ships reached the Firth of Forth. Meanwhile, the damaged destroyer Meteor, crippled during the battle, was successfully towed into the Humber estuary. But Lion's ordeal was far from over. She was out of action for 4 months. First Sea Lord Admiral John Fisher insisted that the damage be repaired at Armstrong Shipyard on the River Tyne, without the ship ever entering dry dock. It was an ambitious and incredibly difficult undertaking, one that significantly slowed the repair process. On the German side, the surviving ships limped back to port. Derfflinger required only minor repairs and was back in action by February 17th, but Seydlitz had suffered far worse. With extensive damage from the ammunition fire that nearly destroyed her, Seydlitz needed dry dock repairs and wasn't ready for sea again until April 1st. The Battle of Dogger Bank had ended, but its effects lingered. The British had secured a victory, but it had come at a cost. The Germans had lost Blücher, and their battlecruiser force had been severely shaken, but crucially, the British had failed to deliver a decisive blow. In the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Dogger Bank, confusion clouded both sides' understanding of what had truly happened. The Germans initially believed that the British battlecruiser Tiger had been sunk after witnessing a large fire blazing across her decks. But as reports filtered in, it became painfully clear that the battle had been a serious German setback. For Kaiser Wilhelm II, this was unacceptable. He swiftly issued an order forbidding unnecessary risks to surface vessels, a directive that would shape German naval operations for the rest of the war. Admiral Friedrich von Ingenohl, commander of the High Seas Fleet, bore the brunt of the blame and was dismissed, replaced by Admiral Hugo von Pohl. The damage inflicted on the battlecruiser Seydlitz exposed critical flaws in the German Navy's ship design and operational procedures, especially in the protection of the magazines and the handling of ammunition. Investigations revealed that poor safety protocols had almost led to Seydlitz's destruction. Reforms followed, correcting many of these dangerous oversights before the next major naval engagement at Jutland in May of 1916. Yet, the Germans misread one of the most crucial lessons from Dogger Bank. The precise timing of the British interception seemed too perfect to be a coincidence. Convinced that British fishing trawlers or local spies had tipped off the Royal Navy, the Germans failed to realise that their encrypted wireless messages were being read by British codebreakers in Room 40. Even years later, Admiral Reinhard Scheer, writing in 1920, admitted suspicions that the British might have known about the raid in advance, but chalked it up to chance. Or at least, that's what he let the public believe. On the British side, the victory at Dogger Bank felt hollow. Vice Admiral David Beatty saw the battle as a missed opportunity. Though Blucher had been sunk, the main German force had escaped. The Admiralty initially believed that Derfflinger had been heavily damaged and shared Beatty's disappointment in not turning the tactical victory into a decisive one. Worse still, the battle exposed deep flaws within the British fleet. The very issues that had allowed the German battlecruisers to escape, poor communication, ineffective signalling, and misinterpretations of orders, remained unresolved. Beatty's attempt to signal a continued pursuit had been garbled, with two separate commands hoisted on a single flag signal, leading to the disastrous misreading that cost the British their chance to finish off the German squadron. Rear Admiral Gordon Moore, who had misinterpreted Beatty's intentions, was quietly reassigned, sent to the Canary Islands, a polite exile. Captain Henry Pelly of Tiger was blamed for failing to assume command when Lion was disabled. Yet, the officer most responsible for the signalling error, Beatty's Flag Lieutenant Ralph Seymour, remained at his post. The British believed they had learned valuable lessons, but many of the same mistakes would haunt them again. At the Battle of Jutland, just over a year later, the Royal Navy would once again struggle with poor communication, flawed tactics, and catastrophic ammunition handling procedures. Errors that would cost them dearly. Still, the Battle of Dogger Bank gave the British public a much-needed morale boost. Newspapers hailed the sinking of Blucher as a triumph, and victory posters dotted the streets of London. But beneath the surface, both navies were now aware of the brutal realities of modern naval warfare, where speed, firepower and communication could determine victory or disaster in mere moments. In the aftermath of the Battle of Dogger Bank, the human cost became painfully clear. According to the official naval historian Julian Corbett, writing in 1929, out of the 1,026 crew members aboard the German cruiser Blucher, 792 were killed and 45 wounded. The British managed to rescue 189 men from the sinking ship. On the Seydlitz, the damage was severe as well, with 159 sailors killed and 33 wounded. The light cruiser Kolberg reported 3 men killed and 2 wounded. In 1965, historian Arthur Marder estimated that over 1,000 German sailors had been either killed or captured, compared to British casualties of fewer than 50 men killed or wounded. Martin Middlebrook, writing in 2003, offered slightly updated figures, estimating that 951 German sailors had been killed and 78 wounded. Most of these losses came from the Blucher. The devastating fire in the Seydlitz's 2 rear turrets claimed 153 lives and wounded 33 more. British ships rescued 189 unwounded German sailors and 45 who were injured. On the British side, casualties were notably lower. The battlecruiser Lion suffered 2 dead and 11 wounded, mostly due to a shell hit in the forward turret lobby. The Tiger had the heaviest British casualties, with 10 killed and 9 wounded. The destroyer Meteor lost 4 crew members, with 2 more wounded. In total, the British reported 15 killed and 80 wounded. The gunnery records from the battle offer a telling glimpse into the intensity of the confrontation. HMS Lion fired 243 13.5-inch shells, managing to hit the Blucher once, the Derfflinger once, and the Seydlitz twice. In return, the Lion was struck 16 times by 11 and 12-inch shells, and once by an 8.2-inch shell, resulting in 1 fatality and 20 wounded. HMS Tiger fired the most shells, 355 13.5-inch rounds, but only scored 3 hits, 1 on the Derfflinger and 2 on the Seydlitz. The Tiger was hit 6 times by heavy shells and once by an 8.2-inch shell, leading to 10 deaths and 11 wounded. HMS Princess Royal launched 271 13.5-inch shells, striking the Derfflinger once, but emerging unscathed. The HMS New Zealand fired 147 12-inch shells, but failed to land a single hit and also avoided enemy fire. HMS Indomitable fired 134 12-inch shells, hitting the Blucher 8 times and taking 1 minor hit in return. On the German side, the Seydlitz fired 390 11-inch shells, scoring 8 hits on the Lion and Tiger, but absorbing 3 13.5-inch shell hits herself, 1 from the Tiger and 2 from the Lion. These hits resulted in the deaths of 159 crew members and left 33 wounded. The Moltke launched 276 11-inch shells, hitting the Lion and Tiger 8 times but miraculously avoiding any return fire. The Derfflinger fired 310 12-inch shells, landing between 5 and 6 hits on the Lion, Tiger and Princess Royal, but also took 3 13.5-inch hits, 1 from each of the British battlecruisers, without suffering any casualties. The Blucher, heavily outgunned and slower than the other German ships, managed to fire 12 8.2-inch shells, landing 1 hit each on the Lion, Tiger and Indomitable before being relentlessly pounded by approximately 70 shells and eventually struck by 7 torpedoes. Her losses were staggering, with 792 killed and 234 taken prisoner, 45 of whom were wounded. This sobering tally of lives lost and damaged ships highlights the brutal cost of naval warfare during the First World War. The Battle of Dogger Bank, though tactically inconclusive, had a lasting impact on naval strategies and ship designs, influencing future engagements in the war. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this dive into the past, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from ASMR War History. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, sleep well, my friends.